Well, as you guys can see, David has put a lot of time, effort, and thought into this design and its history, as well as its universe. But now it's that part of the show where we dig deep and ask him about the design and how it came to be.
I was a history major when I was in college, so understanding how history is written and how it works is something I have my brain wrapped around pretty good. And Star Trek history, as wonderful as it is, can be messy, contradictory, missing. I kind of have this constant need to fix, organize, and arrange things in my life. And with my Star Trek lore, my own headcanon, I think, as people like to call it, I needed to provide some structure and some order to that. And I have so many things I want to build and so many things I want to show. I'm just like, you know what? Why don't I just make my own little pocket Star Trek universe? And Star Trek Enterprise, as you guys can see, was really one of my favorite shows. And I mean, maybe my age is showing here, but that was the first Star Trek show I ever actually watched as it was coming out on TV.
Well, how then did that come to deal with Trekyards? I mean, obviously, it's different. I mean, a lot of people have their own ship designs, but then why work with us in it and create an episode like this?
Well, first off, I love Trekyards. Trekyards is the best. You guys, I always liked watching your videos for a long time. I was hurt pretty bad. I was in the hospital for a while, and that was in 2017, and that's really when I discovered your channel, and I was bedridden in a hospital bed for a couple months, so I just binge watched everything you ever made, pretty much. You and some other channels, too. And then, as soon as I was able to, I actually had a Yorktown class put on your channel before many, many years ago. That was my first, I just want to do it to get it done. And this was a real serious, let's go learn how to make good 3D models, good ships.
Now, this is the first of many ships that we're going to be featuring, and we're going to tie them all together to show you guys this universe. With this first class of ship, the Discovery class, which is kind of, it's very similar to the Conestoga that we saw, and which is referenced what we just talked about. Is this the one that started it all, or did you have other ones lined up, or what was the thought process there?
The Discovery class is designed from a video game called Star Trek Legacy. It came out in 2005, and this pattern here is that was my first Star Trek game too. So naturally, that became my favorite one.
How did you play it though? On what console?
Well, on both. I had it on 360 and computer.
Okay. Radically different experiences.
Yes, it is. It is very different experiences. You're correct. And the Discovery class that was in there was always one of my favorite ships. I always really liked the design of it. And, obviously I picked up right away when I was a kid, like, oh my God, this was based off the Conestoga. They just retrofitted it and made it into a Star Trek ship. And I really liked the modular design of it because really when you look at it, it looks almost kind of like it has modern day spaceship thought process behind it, especially like when you look back at the Conestoga and some of the designs where that connected into that old SS Valiant concept art and kind of the stepping stones they got there. So to me, I always liked it because like this looked to me like something where, you could have like 5 different factories on Earth building 5 different parts, and then they duct tape it together and blast it into orbit or send it up separately, and it clicks together like Lego parts. And this is something I was thinking that would make sense for a very mass-produced vessel during the war. That was like this cheap, fast, easy thing that could get the job done, and Starfleet could, put these things out in great numbers, while more complicated ships like, the NXs and things like that would take a much longer time to construct. You wouldn't be able to do that as quickly. It's a different design philosophy. And I love the modular concept, and the Discovery to me was a good place to start with that because it wasn't a ship that I invented. So there is something to tie a tether onto when we look at my design ship progression. So you can go like, okay, well, I saw what the Prime Universe Discovery looked like in the game. I see what Dave's made over here with this Prime design. And then you're going to see that kind of do this as we move towards where I'm going with ships. But it helps ground you with a starting place, I think, to look at for analyzing the designs.
Well, and speaking of, we've only seen one version of the design this episode, kind of, I think the end of its life you talked about, but where was that balance then for you of taking an existing design, how much to change and not to change, how much to make it your own? What was the gut reaction there? Because obviously the further away you go, it's more original, but you're losing that spark.
I guess kind of the left and right boundaries of it is if you just took my 3D model and you silhouetted it at any angle, you should still be able to tell that it's a Discovery class ship. If you know what the Discovery class is and you look at a silhouette of my ship, you're like, okay, I know what this is supposed to be. So the general components, their scale, things like that, that's not really going to change. But things that I wanted to really dive into on the detail level are things like armor plating, right? Because that's something you're going to see really expanded upon, especially as we get into later ships here. You're going to see us really get into the weeds with that. And that's maybe just a mental thing for me. I never really liked, like, here's a cylinder and I paint it gray, and maybe I put an Aztec on it and maybe I don't. And this is a big metal cylinder in space with a texture on it. That never made sense to me because, I got an opportunity to go visit the Navy yards in Philadelphia near where I live, and they build warships there. And you can literally like drive like right up to it, and you can see the process of them putting this stuff together. And it's not like there's some big gray blob where they just put it in there and say, Viola, we have a warship. Even though it looks like from a distance like this huge thing, it's all made up of sections and panels, and it's really 1.5 million small things that they've fused and welded together and bolted to keep this thing together. I think it was the Zimmerwalt class, the new stealth destroyers, is what I got to see. So like they're like cool. Super sleek as far as ships go. But if you're like this close to it, you can definitely see like, nope, that's not the case. Like it's like a bunch of little panels all together. And a lot of it is derived from how would you build this ship? So I'm not just building it to like look good or fit the Starfleet aesthetic. It's like it has to look like this is something that can actually be built to me. So what would the parts and pieces and the steps be? And like I have to be able to kind of visualize how does all this come together and what's holding it together once you get all the pieces assembled.
One thing I see then, why is the nose so big?
A couple of reasons. I think we have some renders where you'll be able to show the nose cone actually opening to show the deflector dish inside of it. Yeah. So a little bit of that is the nose cone had to be shaped like that. And I'm thinking because there's properties of that metal in the nose cone that have to interact with that deflector dish that's back in there. And that is just like the optimal size for the nose cone to be for these things to work the way that they're supposed to. Because it's like a two-part system. The nose cone is more than just the armor plating on it. It's actually part of the deflector dish system.
Well, that's something I want to jump in there. I want to thank you for, because F-14s, fighter jets, they have the same thing. They got the radar behind the nose cone. A lot of people don't realize that. Like they actually swing out, you see the thing, and people have complained that the Miranda class and other ships don't have deflector dishes. So you've just you haven't set a precedent, but you've explained that deflector dishes can be set back and hidden behind different materials. So it could be that the leading edge of the Reliant and the Saucer has like some smaller deflector dishes that are hidden. So I love that. So I want to thank you for that. That's awesome.
I've never bought that for a second, that the Miranda class didn't have a deflector dish. I remember the first time I saw it, I noticed it, but the first thing that came to mind was, well, it's probably like on some other part of the ship or behind some like plating or something like.
And I think of it as a two-way mirror. You can create two-way mirrors or one-way mirrors that can still be utilized, probably less effectively. That's okay if it works in that context.
I also want to say thank you for including the Kzinti, because a lot of people have heard of the Kzinti, know about the Kzinti, and love it. And the fact that you've taken some Starfleet Battles material that they use, drones and missiles or heavy use of that, and you've created a point defense system to counter that, I think that's fantastic. So it's a nice tying in of different universes and stuff. So.
Star Trek's kind of like a multiverse of whatever you want to make it. And even though I am doing my own thing here, I have every single FASA book. I have every Star Trek book that's ever been made. I have it in this white cabinet behind me. And I try to use the universe that I have. I think that even if you're not going to follow, prime timeline or prime canon, there's still so much Trek that has just been created over the last 50 years. And so much of it is like these really amazing, like characters, creatures, planets, places that, they exist in some RPG book in somebody's basement somewhere, and you don't really get to see them prime time on the screen ever. So I really want to try and find those kind of things. And the Kzinti are a prime example of that. You really only see them for one episode in the animated series, the Slaver weapon. And, it's kind of a cartoonish representation of them. And, it's a extremely one-dimensional view of the Kzinti. And I've always wanted to really expand upon that and really, take what I think was always a really fascinating concept as an enemy for the Federation to deal with and, explode that thing wide open. I do have Kzinti ships that are being worked on. So what this gets down to is I've studied the model of the NX, the actual model of the NX that was used on the TV show pretty extensively. And I've gotten very up in the weeds on some of the detail sections. And sometimes you're like, whoa, that is really awesome. And then other times you're kind of like mortified when you see what's actually there. The key example of that is if you get really up in the business of the warp nacelles and you get in the blue grill area of it, really what it is, it's like a flat texture, and then there's like these holes perforated in through it, and then that flat texture is like lit up and colorized. And to me, that never really jived with what I was thinking was on the inside of the nacelles. It looks different on the outside of the nacelles versus the inside. It's two separate like setups they have. And that was one thing that always really kind of was like, whoa, that is not how I thought that was going to look. And I personally didn't much care for it. To me, I'm like, you should be able to see the exposed warp coils, right? Because they have to be venting out to space to either cool or connect with the other warp nacelle on the other side, depending on what side of the nacelle you're on. And there had to be some kind of protective mesh around that would prevent things from banging into those warp coils or making contact with them, because they're either extremely hot or delicate-ish enough stuff that you wouldn't want something like a small asteroid or something bouncing into that or making contact with the warp coils on the inside of that nacelle, where so you have your two warp coils or two warp nacelles, and then they have to have that line of sight between each other, and those blue warp coil parts and pieces, like you see in the motion picture or whatever, when you got that purplish beam connecting across between them, if you remember what I'm talking about. To me, I was always like, yeah, you have to have that line of sight between them, and that warp coil exposed part, whether it's the straight up coils like you see on my ship or what you should see on the NX versus a later design ship, that's what that part is and what's going on there. It's just a protective casing around the warp coils.
Now, I know we're putting the complete history of the Atarial in the ship or in the comment section, so you guys can read it if you're interested, but I know you wanted to talk about the ship specifically, so if you could just give us a brief history of the ship, and then if people want to learn more, there's the comment down below. So
this ship started out life as with a different name. It was originally the Vista Cruise. And the reason that's really important is because my universe really talks heavily about the transition from our independent powers, United Earth Starfleet, the Vulcan High Command, and Andorian Imperial Guard, and how these elements all morphed into the Federation Starfleet. And with my universe, it takes, like, again, a little bit more of that realism approach to it. So, like, you wouldn't see, in my opinion, a Starfleet in the future made up of 150 races, and all of the ships are crewed by humans and have human-related names on their ships, right? You would have, I would think, like a legally mandated like system saying, a certain representation of each of the species with their names of their ships and who's in charge of them and stuff like that. So when the ships become part of the Federation Starfleet, they get renamed and they start using names from all the other allied species that are in the Federation. So that's why you see the ship go from the Vista Cruise to the Atarial. And the Vista Cruise was named after a famous Earth military officer. And the Atarial is named after a mythical creature from one of the moons of Andoria that settlers, it was kind of like an old legend. They would talk about this creature, and we have an image of the patch for the ship that we can put on the screen. And we actually have like a drawing of what that creature looked like and a little bit of a fun backstory behind that. And this ship served in the Earth-Romulan War, got beat up pretty good, blown apart, put back together. And the story really highlights the technical aspects of the ship's modular design. Because in the field, when you had like 50 of these involved in some big battle that happened, maybe 6 of them are destroyed, and you have another dozen that are in some various state of disrepair, and they could just detach the part that was messed up, and they'd go to another ship, say, okay, well, the nacelles and the nose cone of this one are good, so take those off and put this one on. And that way, they wouldn't have to necessarily go back to star bases or shipyards to get these things repaired. They could, to a certain extent, pop off the major defective elements and then put new ones on in the field, because The Earth-Romulan War is something that I'm also going to be writing about extensively. My interpretation of, I know every time somebody talks about this, it's totally different, which is great. I love that. I love reading different people's interpretations of these things. In mine, it was a war that was fought without a very good logistics system in place because the Federation didn't exist yet, and you're fighting a war across a fairly large swath of interstellar territory, especially if you look at the condition of the United Earth and Starfleet at where we leave them off in Star Trek Enterprise in 2154. It's not very well developed. So I think that infrastructure would have a very hard time supporting like a World War II level conflict in space between the various allied powers and the Romulans. And then this particular ship would go on to serve in the war with the Kzinti, and it would be part of some very, very famous battles that are going to play a huge role in later ships that we...
Do you guys feel teased? I feel teased.
You should.
A lot of stuff coming, guys, and a lot.
Yes. So look forward to more from David with ship-wise, history-wise, universe-wise, the Bissig verse, I guess we're calling it.
The Bissig verse. All right. All right.
But yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you, David, for doing this, for designing the ship and bringing it to us, and being such a fan of Trekyards. We really appreciate that. So, thank you very much.
And of course, hopefully you guys will have seen David in the lives occasionally. If you do, please do keep joining the lives if you want to, and watch all the videos, and say hi in the comments. Your interaction's nice, and you yourself can interact and get an originals if you would like. Getting an original ship made, it can be any. It doesn't have to be Starfleet. It could be any faction. Even could be a star base. We've even had a fertilizer for crops. Very varied. So do email trekyards@hotmail.com if you're interested, and we'll let you know the process.
And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And put comments down below for David, what you think of his ship, what if you have any questions for him, because I'm sure he's going to be reading the comments and answering you guys whenever he can. So anyways, until next time, guys, I am Captain Foley.
I am Connor Holmes.
And I'm Dave Bissig.
And this has been Trekyards Originals. See ya.
Bissig verse part 1.
Yes.
It's the Iron Man to the whole universe.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
See ya.